How behind do you feel like you are, or maybe uninformed is the wrong word? Like, I can tell, like, last year, even for me, covering the Giants, right, not being in the building, not seeing these guys in person, I felt like I was flying blind a little bit with the season. Not being able to have your experience at Indy this year where you interact with scouts and GMs and coaches face-to-face, do you feel like you're flying blind a little bit, or have you kind of adjusted to the new normal, and are you still, you think, as much in the loop as you usually are at this time of year?
No, I'm definitely behind in terms of league knowledge on players where I'm at. My personal evaluations, I go to college football games just about every Saturday in the fall, typically Big Ten or MAC games because that's the area where I live. But I wind up going to Cincinnati every now and then too, and I didn't get to do any of that this year. So I haven't seen many of these players play live, certainly not in the last year, and that's a downside. And one of the things that you get when you go to games, you guys know this, there's people in there that are talking. You'll sit with the scouts from teams. You'll talk with them. You'll go out and have breakfast with them the next morning or the day before. And all that has been eliminated too. So I'm much less in the know on the backgrounds of players, on how teams feel about the players than ever before. The way I'm trying to adjust is I'm trying to make it where I need to be really sure in my own evaluations from what I've seen on film and what little things that I have, picked up in person and talking to people who are more looped in than I am, be it with programs or with NFL teams or whatever. It's a chance for the tape to really shine, and I'm trying to adjust to that, but I'm not going to lie, it hasn't been easy.
Well, Jeff, speaking of the tape, on a related note, on top of the fact that access has been limited for individuals like yourself, you can also argue team executives may have not been able to go to as many college football games this past season, and also players opted out because of the land of the unknown that went on, of course, with COVID. So how do you think team executives are going to walk that fine line this year when, to your point, they're trying to determine, do we select a player that actually took part in this college football season? There's a little bit more substance on film versus there's a player that opted out, but his film was pretty strong the previous year. However, there is still a bit of a guessing game as to how much he's dropped off by not playing competitive football.
Yeah, and that's a tough balance to find because, was this a guy who relied a lot on being a better athlete than the players around him? Was this a guy who needed some development in terms of his technique? If you look at an offensive lineman as an example, who opted out, Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, I'll use. Really good tape, specifically against Chase Young in 2019, but also had some instances where there was definitely some ways where he improved. He sets his feet too early, tends to set up a little bit narrow. There were things that you need to see him progress. Are you going to be able to find out from the people that he's training with, the O-line school or whatever he's doing, is he improving on those things, or does he still have the same habits? And you're guessing a little bit on how much do you believe that this guy, that what he's learning, without being in the fires of competition, will translate and will become muscle memory for him and reflexive knowledge once he gets back out into the field. That's a definite. It's tougher. I do think that there's going to be some instances where teams will be look at a player, two players, and the guy who played in 2020, even if it was only for a handful of games, probably going to have a little bit more knowledge on him and feel a little bit better in their evaluation about him than a guy who opted out.
I want to stay in that lane because I think Lance brings us to an interesting point. And, you mentioned Rashawn Slater, Penei Sewell's another guy. But I think two defensive players that opted out are particularly interesting, especially since they're names that have been mentioned for the Giants at number 11. And I did my tape study on both Micah Parsons and Caleb Farley, Jeff. And Farley's a guy to me. I've never seen a guy catch up to wide receivers after he gets beaten as much as Caleb Farley does now. You'd rather have not get beaten to begin with, right? But it happens sometimes. But his makeup speed and traits are just, they're as good as anything I've seen in a while. There's rumors out there he's running like a 4.28, crazy things like that. Then you have Parsons, who in the same deal, you see the really great athleticism, but maybe some of the finer points and techniques and the mental part of playing linebacker is not there yet. So how do you judge those two guys specifically? Because their traits are of top 10 players. If they played this year and they continue to improve technically, maybe they're top 5 picks. Who knows? How do you think about guys like Parsons and Farley?
Yeah, Farley's interesting, and you're right. He does wind up getting, and I think it's a case of some of it is the way that Virginia Tech cornerbacks are coached. You guys have been around long enough to remember guys like D'Angelo Hall even.
Yep.
They are chase down guys. They want to eliminate the short passes. If the quarterback can beat you with the receiver over the top and beat their speed, they're going to let you try to do that. That's something that obviously the coaching has changed with Justin Puente in there now, but that's the way they roll in Blacksburg. So I wouldn't necessarily hold that against him. And he does, man, his makeup speed and his ability to chase down, and he will chase down plays. There's film of it, specifically the Virginia game from a couple of years ago, where he chases down a guy where you would never think that another human could catch him. And there's Harley. So that's really, really impressive. He reminds me, I'll go against one of your foes here, he reminds me of some of Darius Slay and how he plays the game, where he's going to give up some completions, he's going to give up some big plays, but he's going to make some too. And I think we've learned in the NFL that being able to make plays on defense is just as important as preventing big ones. I think the Buccaneers taught us that. I think the Chiefs have taught us that over the last couple of years, and the Seahawks. That seems to be the trend that the teams are going to. One of the teams that I cover, the Detroit Lions, went in the opposite direction, and they had the worst defense in team history last year. So getting a guy who can make a play like that, even if he is going to he's going to give up touchdowns. He will stare at the quarterback too long. And NFL speed will be better than it was in college. So he's got some risks to him. But when you've got a guy like James Bradbury on the other side, really solid player, I like what I see in him. That's a risk that maybe you can take, to have that guy, chase around, maybe not the faster guy on the other team, but the guy who's not as big of a threat, and make him a threat on defense. So I like that concept. Micah Parsons is a tough one because there's so many different things going on with him. His tape was really, really good, but he's not a perfect prospect. And it's interesting to me that you don't hear a lot of the negatives about him. For me, again, I'll go to the Detroit Lions here for a second. He reminds me a lot of Jared Davis when Jared Davis came out of Florida. Now, he's bigger, and he's certainly got quicker reactions when he's asked to make reactions. I think one of the reasons why Jared Davis has flopped in the NFL by and large is because he thinks too much. He doesn't just go. And you don't see that with Parsons. You see a guy who's, okay, I got twitch, I'm going to use it. He's very good attacking downhill. Doesn't necessarily have the best feel for where blockers are coming from. Doesn't always sense where the pass routes are going to be going. If he's tasked into his own coverage and the tight end crosses his face, he gets a little confused on it. That shows up on tape. But he's a really instinctive attacking player. If you're looking for a guy to be like Devin White was for Tampa Bay in their Super Bowl run, he's it. That's the kind of player he can be. Doesn't mean he will be, but there were some things on tape, though, that I really wanted to see him improve upon. And obviously that didn't happen. And, with the Penn State, the allegations that are out there against him, there's a lot of things that are, fingers pointing. They don't always point directly at him, but he's involved in a lot of things. And that's another thing where you're not going to have that information at your hand as much because he wasn't with the team this fall. So the Penn State players and coaching staff might not have the best information or be the best source of information when there's things on him that you really need to iron out to make sure that you're drafting a guy who's going to represent your team well.
Just to quickly follow up on that, Jeff, before we move on to a different spot or a different player, do you see either Farley or, frankly, any of the other cornerbacks or Parsons, are they true top 10 players to you, or are they a little bit too risky for your blood up there?
They're probably a little risky for me. I really like this wide receiver class. I do like the top end quarterbacks. There's a couple of defensive players that are there. Parsons, if you could tell me for sure that he's dialed in and going to be a good teammate and a guy that I will trust, representing my franchise, he probably has the talent to be that. Farley, it's not a reach if you were to take him at 11, but it's probably a little bit higher than I would be comfortable seeing him.
Well, Jeff, the Giants haven't taken a linebacker in the first round since '84 and Carl Banks. So I keep telling Giants fans they can throw out Micah Parsons all they want. I'd be blown away if that drought ends in 2021, as we're talking with Jeff Risdon of Real GM. And, Jeff, you brought up the fact that you cover the Lions. For members of our audience who aren't familiar, also he serves as the managing editor of the Lions Wire. And the reason why I want to expand a little bit on that is because the Giants at 11 are obviously wondering what teams in front of them are going to do. And you brought up the receiving core. I look at the Lions. Detroit, to me, is in a very similar situation like the Giants. They could use a playmaker on offense. Basically, their entire receiving core is set to hit free agency. You mentioned, though, their defense struggled immensely. I'm curious, where do you think Detroit may go at pick 7? Because that could very well impact who's still on the board for the Giants at 11.
Yeah, and we got to talk to the new general manager, Brad Holmes, yesterday, and he didn't rule anything out, but also didn't necessarily say that where they were going to go. The common wisdom is that they're going to take a wide receiver. They have one wide receiver, 5th-round pick last year, Quintez Cephas, who caught a pass last year on the active roster. Their top 4 receivers are all free agents. We don't know what they're doing yet with Kenny Golladay. He could get franchise tagged. In fact, he could get franchise tagged today for all we know. It doesn't necessarily mean he'll be back, though. But so they absolutely, desperately need multiple wide receivers. It wouldn't surprise me if they sign a big one in free agency and also draft one at number 7. They do have an option at quarterback that can't be taken off the board. They have Jared Goff. Brad Holmes was part of the team that engineered the trade up to get him for the Rams with the number 1 pick in 2016. Holmes clearly wanted Goff included in the Matthew Stafford trade, so there's a lot of finger wagging and wondering what's going on with Jared Goff. Is he the long-term solution? My personal take is I think he will be the starting quarterback in 2021, and beyond that, all bets are off. And if they think that they can get a replacement for him that is the long-term solution at number 7, they will do it. I don't really see any other position in play for them, possibly offensive line. You got to remember, they just paid Taylor Decker a hefty sum of money, and by the way, he's worth every penny of. He's a great left tackle. Their center is one of the best in the league in Frank Ragnow. I can't see them investing that much in their offensive line again, but if Sewell is there, if Slater is there, they probably can't be ruled out. Really don't see them looking at any defensive players, which is odd because the Lions' defense is why they were so terrible last year, but the way things have played out, the needs are definitely on offense, unfortunately.
Since they're kind of in a long-term rebuild here, Jeff, is a trade down a possibility for them?
Absolutely, and if you're looking for a team that would be willing to move down, number 7 is certainly for sale. I think Holmes made that pretty clear yesterday. So if the Giants are looking for a specific target at number 7, if it's a guy like Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith or Jamar Chase, and one of those guys will certainly be there, maybe 2 of them. If that's what the Giants want, they should certainly call the Detroit Lions because I think they will find at least a receptive person answering the phone anyways.
Well, here's a follow-up then, Jeff. Do you think the Giants can stay home at 11 and wait for someone like Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, or Kyle Pitts? Those seem to be the top 4 playmakers that everyone talks about that the Giants would love to add to their offense. Can they wait at 11, or do you think they will have to make a move to get one of those guys?
I wouldn't rely on waiting to 11, but if you're comfortable with other options as well, if you like the top pass rushing option, a guy like Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia is my top pass rusher. I think he's going to be special in the NFL. If you want to get a cornerback like Farley or like Jace Horn out of South Carolina, they're certainly worthy of the number 11 pick. It's probably a little early for them again, but it's not out of the question for it. To Lance's point, I don't think they're going to take Micah Parsons. I always say Chandler Parsons. I don't know why you do that. Micah Parsons. I've got too much basketball in mind. I don't think that's a viable option either, but you have to keep it in play. If you're okay with that, and then taking a guy like Rashad Bateman in the 2nd round, or some of the other wide receivers that are out there, a guy like Rondale Moore, Elijah Moore, a lot of wide receiving talent in the first 2 days of the draft. You don't want if you really covet a guy like Pitts, and he's easy to covet. I don't see him as a tight end, by the way. I see him as a little bit of a faster Mike Evans in the NFL, and I think that's how he'll get used in the NFL. Certainly a lot of appeal on that. Are all 4 of those guys going to go when you've got 3 or 4 quarterbacks up there, 2 or 3 offensive linemen up there? That's a dangerous game to play. The Giants could certainly deal with moving up, especially if they sense that the teams that are, a team like Denver is a fly in the ointment, because who knows what they're going to do. They could take a quarterback. They could take a wide receiver, probably not, but they could. They seem to be the hot spot for the first defensive player to come off the board. So, it's tough to balance that. If you have a specific guy in mind, go get him. That would be my philosophy on it. If you have a range of players that are all basically the same to you, I'd probably sit pat and wait.
Jeff, I want to expand on our conversation here about those 4 offensive players, because if you're the Giants, the fact that you rank 31st on the offensive side of the ball, similar to what you were talking about, the struggles with the Lions, I think it's natural that the Giants would want to bring in another offensive playmaker, or maybe game changer if we describe it that way. If we were to compare Kyle Pitts, and we've had this conversation a lot on our show, and I'm curious your perspective, the upside of Pitts, who you just said could be a big Mike Evans type of guy, versus, let's assume Chase is off the board, because in all likelihood, I don't think he's still going to be around there at 11. But if you put Pitts versus Waddle / Devontae Smith, and either 3 of them are there, 2 of the 3 are there, how would you assess who you think would be more upside-wise with respect to the Giants' offense?
In the Giants-specific offense, I would go with Pitts there, because I do think that he does offer you the ability. He can lining him up in line is foolish, but lining him up as a move tight end, a guy who can go across the formation and flex out to the slot, I think he can play that role very effectively. That's kind of what he did at Florida. His size, his speed. I know there are comparisons out there to DK Metcalf. He's not that kind of receiver. He's a little bit different than that. He made a lot more happen after the catch than a guy like Metcalf, who's much more of a pure, deeper threat, and a really good one at that. I think that can work. He does have, and this is something you have to consider, he's played with a mobile quarterback who's good at making things happen after the initial play breaks down. He's great at that. That's where he thrived at Florida. That's something that I think Daniel Jones does that a lot of other teams don't necessarily have at the quarterback position. We're going to be looking for it. I like Jones and his ability to make things happen with his legs. He's got to keep his feet, obviously, but he's capable of doing those sorts of things and operating outside the structure of the regular offense. I think Pitts is the best wide receiver, and I will call him a wide receiver here for that purpose, the best receiver in this draft at doing that very type of thing. So that would be appealing to me. Smith, man, he had such a phenomenal year. Really smart, really tough for his size, but his size is a little bit scary. You look at guys that are of that ilk, a guy like Tavon Austin, a guy like Paul Richardson, to go back in the day a little bit, as sort of worst case scenarios for durability. There's a lot to like with him. I mean, he won the Heisman for good reason. And he's very good also at running after the catch. But, I would go towards Pitts there. Waddle is much more of and before he got hurt, you really loved his deep speed. He impacts the game the way that Will Fuller has done for the Houston Texans. You don't always know if Will Fuller is going to catch the ball, but you darn well better be able to cover him all the way down the field, and he's going to get your safety out of the middle of the field, because he can catch it, and he is going to beat your corner with his speed. That's the kind of guy that Jalen Waddle is. That changes the dynamics of how a defense plays your offense. That opens things up for the underneath passing game when you throw the little flare out to Saquon. He's going to have more room. Your tight end in the middle of the field is going to have more room. Your underneath routes, crossing routes, those are going to be that much more effective, and they're going to have that much more space to catch and run after it because of a guy like Waddle. So if you're comfortable with the fact that he might not put up as big of numbers, but could also have that kind of impact, you got to consider him there too.
All right, Jeff, let's say the Giants don't get one of those top 4 playmakers in the first round. They're waiting around, and they're like, all right, we have to wait now to our second-round pick 43, and make a decision as to what we're going to do here. What receivers do you like in the second round there? Remember, the Giants already have a guy like Sterling Shepard who could play inside. They have a guy like Slayton that can win deep. So if you're looking for like that kind of X-wide receiver that can win all over the field, win deep, win short, be a little physical, who are the guys that you might like that could be there in the second round that could fit that type of mold that can complement both Slayton and Sterling Shepard?
Yeah, and that's the exact right way to phrase that question, by the way, to figure out what you've got and what works with those guys. A guy like Rashad Bateman from Minnesota, he's probably going to be gone. He would fit there. A guy who opted out this year, to go back to the opt-outs, a guy like Nico Collins from Michigan, big receiver, can shorten his stride a little bit and get himself open earlier, but he's a vertical threat. He's a big physical guy. He really played well in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Was one of the tougher guys to cover down there. He's a guy that fits into that range. Terrace Marshall from LSU. There's some questions about him that I'm not his biggest fan, but I can see him succeeding in the way that you're talking about him there.
What are the questions with Terrace Marshall, in your opinion?
He doesn't always play at full speed.
I agree with that. You know what, Jeff? I saw the same exact thing when I watched him too. It looked like I don't want to use the word loafing because that's not fair, but it doesn't look like he was in a full sprint every time. Let me put it that way.
You can tell when he's the intended receiver on a play or not. And
good point.
He does not block. Period. And that's gonna hurt his draft stock. There is some talent there, and if you can get a coach that can reach him, he's a guy like that. Backyard here in Western Michigan, Dwayne Eskridge, a little bit older, but he's a slot receiver. He's played outside. He played cornerback, to give you an idea of how good his physicality is. And he was good at it, enough that I thought he had an NFL future as a slot cornerback. He's got speed instantly, can get open really quick, very physical as a blocker, and plays every play like his hair's on fire, sort of the opposite of Marshall. It's probably a little bit early for him in the second round, but if he's there in the third round, that's a guy that you can use. There's an interesting class, Tylan Wallace from Oklahoma State, another guy known for his vertical game, but if you watch their tape, he's really good at avoiding a jam and then flipping right around, flipping those hips around, and getting open for a quick presentation on a three-step drop. Those are things that he does well that a lot of Oklahoma State receivers before him haven't done well. So he's another guy that you have to consider there, too.
Well, a big part of having these playmakers contribute on offense, Jeff, as you can attest to, is also the play of the offensive line. I think you saw that firsthand with the Cleveland Browns, another team that you monitor closely based on what they did in the draft last year and free agency. And the Giants' offensive line over the last few years has been a place that they've tried to experiment. And I think most of us would agree it's far from being a finished product. So it's possible if some of those weapons that we talked about are not there at 11, maybe the Giants look to bolster the offensive line again. I'm curious, do you see in this class, compared to last year, and the Giants went offensive line with Andrew Thomas, and there was that cluster of four guys, and all of them, for the most part, proved to be difference makers, especially with what happened with Tampa Bay and Tristan Wirfs. Do you see this year's group? Can they have that much of an impact if you were a team that targeted an offensive lineman within the top 10 or just outside, which is where the Giants are?
There's potential for that. I think Sewell is a rare prospect. He would, for me, grade out better than any of the guys last year, and I liked the guys last year, by the way, Thomas included. And you're right, I do think that all of the top guys, Jets fans are a little wonky on Becton. I think they either overhype him or dog him too hard. That's what Jet fans do with most players. He's in that conversation. The guy that interests me a lot is Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. Another guy, unrefined prospect, but the athletic talent is unbelievable there. This is a guy who could wind up being a guy like Tristan Wirfs was for Tampa Bay, a starter on a team that goes on a playoff run and a difference maker, and a guy who gets Rookie of the Year votes. He has that kind of upside. He's not there yet, though, and I'm not sure that if I'm the Giants that I can justify taking 2 first-round picks in a row at a position where it helps your team, but does it help them? Does it make them that much more dynamic? I think you're going to get much more impact out of a pass rusher or a playmaking corner or a wide receiver or an offensive weapon to help as much as you would with a tackle there. Darrisaw is good. Another guy that gets some love and is a natural right tackle is Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan, another opt-out guy. You're going to see his name creep up draft boards. He's not in many first-round mocks right now. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he's gone by pick 25. So if the Giants are able to engineer a trade back, and that's something else you have to consider. He's a guy, would you be in consideration there with your extra pick that you get? And he would be a good fit, too.
Do you see Slater as a tackle or a guard, Jeff?
I see, for me, he played tackle very well. I think in the NFL, I think his footwork is going to make him, or at least make most teams think about him as a guard. And he can be the hybrid guy. We have a guy like that in Detroit and Tyrell Crosby. They wound up keeping him at tackle against the objections of many people, myself included, who saw a wide open space at right guard and hey, put him there. And they wound up getting rewarded with a pretty solid right tackle last year. He's higher end than that with his athleticism. Slater is. But I see him being that kind of a guy where I'm not sure that he's ever going to be a standout tackle or a standout guard, but he'll be good enough to start at those. But if I'm picking in the top 15, I want a guy who's got Pro Bowl potential. I want a guy who can make a difference on my team both right away and in the long term. And I'm not sure that Slater gives you that.
Jeff, as opposed to perhaps the Giants, as you mentioned in consecutive years investing in the offensive line, you had said an offensive playmaker, maybe even a defensive pass rusher could do more for the team. Now, interestingly, Leonard Williams is scheduled to be a free agent. So is Dalvin Tomlinson. Williams had a breakout year. In the event they lose Williams, you can argue, well, there could be a hole for the Giants to get after the quarterback, even with the Lorenzo Carters and the O'Shane Ximenez's returning from injury. Gregory Rousseau, who is projected to maybe be within that top 15, how much do you see in him transferring what he's shown flash-wise in college, that he could come in and, I'm not just talking about 2 to 3 years from now, I'm talking about year one, be that impactful player where if you lose an elite pass rusher, he could come in and help fill that void?
Yeah, he's got very impressive tape. I'll go back. He has a similar game to what Olivier Vernon did coming out. And I think Rousseau's probably a little bit better of an athlete. He's a little bit lighter, a little bit lither in space, but he can be that kind of player. And that's a player that I think that the Giants could absolutely use. It's a little high for him. Again, this is a guy, he had an injury issue before his opt-out year, so that always makes you consider. But his ability to close on a ball and to keep blockers out of his way, whether it's a tight end chip or a running back, staying back in pass protection, he's so good at making those guys miss. That's a very appealing player right there.
Final one for me, Jeff, then I'll let you, Lance, get his last one off to you. Second round here, I think there's a chance one of these pass rushers could drop, just because to me this is such a, I don't know, hit or miss type of class. Where a guy like Jason Owe, he had no sacks last year, but he might run like a 4.41 in the 40. You got Jalen Phillips, who has played 1 year of football, is semi-retired because of concussions, came back. His tape might be the best of any pass rusher this year. Go down the list. And then I think, oddly enough, you don't really hear this about edge rushers and offensive tackles, Jeff, but I think maybe an offensive tackle could be there in the second round too. What do you think about those groups at 42 when the Giants pick in the second round?
Boy, you hit on a couple of guys that I have a lot of trouble evaluating myself, in Phillips and Owa. You got to love the athleticism and the potential with Owa, but he didn't have a sack in college. Come on.
It's crazy.
It's hard to justify. Now, he did play with a lot of guys who are in the NFL and who are going to get some sacks in the NFL, so I get that. But, yeah, that's a tough one. And Phillips, John, you know this, Bubby, I am gun-shy on players with concussions.
Yep.
It goes back to my experience with Javed Best in Detroit. That scares me. I would pass on that personally. It doesn't mean he's not going to be a very fine player and that he can't have a long and successful NFL career. I don't want my team taking that risk on a guy who retired because of concussions and then came back. That's just me. Each NFL team's going to have to look at that one differently. But, yeah, there's some talent there. A guy like Hamilcar Rashid is another guy. That's probably a little high for him. There's a guy with some juice, and he flies and destroys screenplays and jet sweeps and things like that. There might not be a better player in the draft at doing that than he is. So you got some options there. Offensive line, when you get into the second round, now you're looking at a guy, can you get an interior lineman? And I don't know if that's the biggest need for the Giants. I still like Kevin Zeitler. I think he's overpaid, but he's a good player.
Well, Jeff, real quick, I want to ask you about a guy like Leatherwood. Do you see him as a tackle or do you see him as a guard? Because I think a lot of people think he might still be sitting there around that 42 area.
Yeah, that's probably the bottom end of his range, but he would certainly be in. And that's a guy that you can say, okay, do I need a right tackle this year? Do I need a left guard next year? That type of thing. You can do that with him. Yeah, he's certainly a guy that fits in that mold.
Jeff, last one for me. I mean, the one thing that we actually haven't focused on, surprisingly, and usually when it comes to the draft, quarterbacks is the big topic of conversation, but I guess it's the fact that we're not expecting the Giants to go in that direction. You alluded to, hey, maybe the Lions see a guy that could ultimately replace Jared Goff, but one way or another, the amount of quarterbacks that goes to the top 10 is going to impact the Giants one way or another, and I'm curious, quarterbacks tend to be overdrafted. We know that. How many do you think are going to go in the top 10? And is the hype a little too much with this year's class, in your estimation?
I think Trevor Lawrence is worth every bit of the hype. He's phenomenal to me. I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be the number one pick. I do like Justin Fields quite a bit. I do think that Zach Wilson and Trey Lance, and I guess you have to throw Mac Jones in the conversation, are getting more hype than what they are, but that always happens this time of year. You guys have been around long enough to know this. This is the time of year where the quarterbacks get propped up and people get excited about it. And then the more they watch, it'll turn. Later this month, at the end of this month and into early April, people are going to go from having Mac Jones as a guy who could possibly be a top 10 pick, and then they're going to start thinking, oh, my God, all the receivers he's throwing to are wide open. He can't move at all. Why is this guy any better than, a fifth-round pick? That's being extreme on it, but it will ebb and it will wane. And you'll see that with all these quarterbacks other than Lawrence, I think. I do think that absolutely 3 will be gone. I would be very surprised if 4 quarterbacks are not taken in the top 10. I do think Trey Lance gets in there. I think the way that the fact that he has so many physical skills and achieved doing in the structure of their offense, which wasn't necessarily built to take advantage of his skills. He's very exciting for me. I like him a lot. I probably like him a little bit more than Wilson, to be honest.
Wow.
But yeah, those guys are all going to go. Mac Jones is the wild card. I cannot fathom a team drafting him in the top 10 with his physical ability. The fact that he took his shirt off down there and looked like me, and I'm a 48-year-old dad, that's a problem for me. I want my quarterbacks to look a little bit more athletic than that. His tape reveals it too. He's not a guy. He's certainly not Tua. He's not Jalen Hurts. He's not that type of Alabama quarterback. This is much more of a John Parker Wilson, that kind of a player. To go back in time a little bit, and that group of players doesn't mean he won't be a good pro, but I think he's going to get wildly overdrafted. But I can't see a team ahead of the Giants pulling the trigger on that. I just can't.
And just for fun, Jeff, give me over/under number of trades ahead of the Giants in the top 10.
Oh wow, I think number 2 is going to get traded. I think the Jets are going to move out of that. It wouldn't surprise me if Detroit moves. Now those two hands could come together. It wouldn't surprise me if you see a team come in for a Trey Lance from outside. So I'll go 3.5.
Okay.
I'd probably play the under on that, but again, this is such a weird draft because we have so many unknowns and so much less information on the players. I can see teams really, really trying hard to trade out. Yeah. The question is, will you find teams that are takers to move up? And that's the great question for the 2021 NFL Draft.
Jeff, awesome stuff, my friend. We really appreciate it. Too bad we can't do it in person. We'll definitely have you on again when we do our mock draft, maybe again to get your latest intel as we approach draft day. All right, bud?
Thanks a lot,
Anytime,
Jeff.
Guys. Anytime you need me, you know how to get me.
Jeff, you're the best, man. Thank you.